Welcome to Time to Talk Quantum. I'm Dr. Kris Naudts, neuroscientist and psychiatrist, founder of Culture Trip and co-founder of Firgun Ventures. Today I'm joined by Dr. Lara Jehi, Chief Research Information Officer at Cleveland Clinic and Professor of Neurology at Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine. Dr. Jehi is the Executive Program Lead for the Discovery Accelerator, which spans more than 50 projects focused on AI, quantum computing, data science education, and international initiatives. She is also a steering committee member of both the Healthcare and Life Sciences Quantum Working Group and the AI Alliance formed by IBM and Meta. Dr. Jehi also serves in advisory roles for industry and federal agencies. I'm also joined by John Morton, Professor of Nanoelectronics and Nanophotonics at University College London and Director of the UCL Quantum Science and Technology Institute. His research involves the coherent control of electron and nuclear spins in solid-state materials and devices, with a focus on quantum technologies. Professor Morton is a co-director of the Quantum Biomedical Sensing Research Hub, the UK's first quantum hub focused on health. He is also a co-founder of not one, but two international quantum computing companies, Quantum Motion, developing quantum processors based on silicon transistor technology, and Phasecraft, the quantum algorithms company. It's time to talk quantum. So the Cleveland Clinic, Lara, can you tell us a bit about its history and its status in the US and the world? I heard it's so big, it has its own postcode, its own prison, its own police, or is that an urban myth?
All of the above, except the prison. We're working on that. Okay. No, you did your homework. So Cleveland Clinic is an organization that's 100 years old. Over 100 years old. We started in 1921. Back then, it was with 4 physicians who had just come back from World War I and thought that there should be a better way of practicing medicine than just each clinician opening up shop on their own. You know, the tradition then was these clinics, the small private practices. So their innovation back then was that medicine should be practiced as a team. And we were one of the first group practices in the US. And from the very beginning, it was a tripartite mission with research, clinical care, and education. And since then, we have grown now to be 83,000 people strong that are distributed across the U.S. in many states. Ohio is our mothership in Cleveland, but we have facilities in Florida and in Nevada, and outside of the U.S. too, in Canada, in Toronto, a place that's focused there on more executive health and sports medicine. In Abu Dhabi, that's a full-fledged surgical medical program now with a new cancer center added to it. And in London, the Cleveland Clinic London is our latest, addition to the health system, now just over 2 years old.
Okay. I associate it strongly with cardiology and cardiac surgery. Is that right?
Correct. The very first cardiac catheterization happened at the clinic. Many firsts, actually, not just in heart. The first face transplant happened in Cleveland Clinic. The first uterus transplant in the U.S. happened in Cleveland Clinic. Some fundamentals of medicine now, like, for example, serotonin, the chemical that drives our understanding of mood disorders and all therapies for depression, anxiety, that compound, that chemical was discovered in Cleveland Clinic. So was the angiotensin, the main chemical that drives hypertension. Hypertension as a disease was defined in Cleveland Clinic back in the time. So biomedical research is really core to what we do. And because our research facility is right across from our hospital, then it always carries that clinical translation and that emphasis on team science with working with our clinicians who are innovating in how care is delivered and how clinical practice is happening, led, of course, with, through innovations in many disciplines. You mentioned heart. That's what we were we were number one in the nation and in the world for almost 3 decades.
I see. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah. You are also, aside from being a professor of neurology, you're also the Chief Research Information Officer. Can you tell us a bit more about that role and why you took that on?
Correct. Yes, I'm a clinician scientist specialized in epilepsy. So my clinical role and my personal research have always been in that space. But I've, by virtue of doing research, I had to learn more about the infrastructure at the Cleveland Clinic when it comes to data, biological samples, regulatory frameworks. So over the years, beyond my personal research, I did things like build an enterprise biorepository where we automated finding patients, consenting them, and collecting samples for biological research. We enrolled over 40,000 patients, collected over 1 million samples in the span of 3 years with 1.5 coordinator, which is a fraction, like a small fraction of the manpower that's typically required because we automated all of it. So I was doing this this is one example, but I was doing many initiatives like that. And then this position for Chief Research Information Officer opened up. It was a new position for Cleveland Clinic because as an organization, we recognized that computation in biomedical research is no longer something that can be done on the side. It had to be intentional, structural. We had to build capacity. So it was fortunate for me because I matured in my personal journey at the same time as the organization acknowledging the need for such a role. And I remember looking at the posting and thinking to myself, well, I'm doing this now. I might as well
Sure.
have the job. And I took that on in early 2020. And little did I know, what came afterwards. But yeah, that's how that came to be.
Oh, excellent. So when and why did the Cleveland Clinic embrace quantum, and what is the idea? Is it envisaged to give you a financial return, or is this just on the frontier of technology that you want to operate? What was the driving force?
Sure, great question. I get that quite often. It's really more of the second point of what you mentioned. As I said, I was new in my role, and I was having to deal with urgent needs for biomedical research here. Our data, for example, was ballooning. We were sitting back then at about 15 petabytes of data for research. And we were growing at the pace of 3 petabytes every year. So we had these big data needs. Everybody wanted to do AI and still wants to do AI, but that was, in a way, the bread and butter, the now of how biomedical research happens. And we entered into an agreement with our local government, the state of Ohio, and Jobs Ohio, that's a public-private entity focused on economic development, to co-invest with Cleveland Clinic about $500 some million over 10 years to create an innovation district that's anchored on biotechnology. So I knew that all of those needs that I mentioned were going to just explode with this new partnership with the state. So I had to think of what do we need from a computational strategy perspective that would fit both what we needed in the present, back then, which was the AI work, but that would also set us apart 5-10 years down the road so that we are relevant in the future, not just keeping up with the present. And it is with that mindset that I thought it's important that we invest in quantum because that is the next frontier. And the way we did that was with our partnership with IBM research at the time in this calculated risk approach where we get what we need as far as AI and infrastructure, compute, talent goes. But at the same time, this will allow us financially to take the risk with quantum to explore what that future would look like.
Okay, got it. So you guys work with IBM, also with Meta, I see. Your main competitor, for lack of a better word, would be the Mayo Clinic, I assume, in the US. They work with Sandbox, indeed Google. What's the main difference, you would say, between what you guys try to do at the Cleveland Clinic and what the Mayo Clinic focuses on?
Yes, Mayo, they're a great group. So for us, the one difference, not just with them, but with any other group, is that we are the only group in the world that has a quantum computer on site.
In the canteen?
In the canteen, yes. We would love to host you, so you get here.
We will come and have a look. Yeah.
And see it in real time. That's what everybody gets excited about. It is actually in the middle of our cafeteria. That was because we had to retrofit it in existing space. And it's a finicky machine, as you know. We needed certain limits with vibration and height and where can we put the machinery that needs to go with it. And there were, the choice at the end was either the canteen in the middle of the research cafeteria or in our data center, which would be in another city. And we went with the canteen because, as I told our finance officer, like all the committees back then, I said, well, we're not buying a diamond ring and sticking it in a drawer. It has to be, somewhere that's visible. But, I have to say that was great because it was a change, right? For these researchers, we're a biomedical research group. So people haven't grown up with the, quantum computing and what it is and what it means. So having the machine be there was a great magnet for external partnerships and to build internal interest and activity around it. That really sets us apart from any other group because we're not doing quantum on the side. We have gone all in, in a way, by having the hardware here and all the activity that comes with that.
And what does the Mayo Clinic focus on versus you guys at the Cleveland? Is there a difference, or?
I think they're trying to figure out what they want to do because that would be a great question to ask them, actually. But I can tell you from our side, we are, our journey has evolved since we've put the machine here. At the beginning, it was more exploratory with let's define what could be promising, applications for it. And we've come to classify those in buckets, so we have our quantum chemistry work, and that is all the activity related to drug discovery. We have our quantum machine learning work, which is more along biomarker discovery, I would say, the disease, some diagnostic type work. And then there is the track that started a bit more recently in the journey where we realized that it's not really about quantum versus AI or, quantum versus machine learning. It's about how all of these computational methods and approaches can work together. And for that, there is the, the theoretical, computational research side, but then there is also the hardware side where we have teams that worked on connecting, say, our QPUs, our quantum processing units, with our GPUs, with our classical clusters. So there is now work that's going on with purely on the engineering side, with how do you connect, and enable this type of computation. But what's driving all of this is the applications, which we're doing with, within our teams.
Okay, okay. Are there any other hospitals that you know in the US or in the world? I mean, I know the Suraski Hospital in Tel Aviv, together with NVIDIA, that is doing some work. Are there other hospitals who have embraced quantum at this point of the journey?
Not to this extent.
Right.
Well, definitely none that has the hardware on site like we do. And
You're the only ones. Yeah.
and none, there is definitely great work. I mean, of course, there's academic work around quantum with quantum computing, with biology and chemistry and life sciences in many great places. We have started this quantum in healthcare and life sciences working group with IBM and many other groups. And that team meets quite regularly, and it has representatives from life sciences,
Yes.
from industry, and from academia in the US and elsewhere. And that has been a tremendous group. We've put out some of our initial publications were all white papers and perspectives. It was necessary to get the lay of the land before we dive in with our original research since then. And you could see in those, names like the Broad Institute and MIT and, Purdue University and University of Chicago. And, so we're working with all of those groups. And we're also bringing in partnerships with startups that are interested in looking at quantum for healthcare and life sciences. We have a whole program around startups. We call it a Catalyzer program. We launched that last year, and initially it was an experiment for us. What we awarded the startups was time on the machine.
Yes.
And the three that we awarded, the one of them is algorithmic, which is this Finnish, they do great work with photodynamic therapy and looking at quantum applications there. We partnered with them around that work, which is now in the finalist group for the Wellcome Leap, with the Wellcome Trust initiative around quantum for biology. So that was one of the three that we supported. The second one, Crador, is a local, US-based startup focused on Alzheimer's disease, with drug research. And they just published some work wherein there were specific examples where they surpassed AlphaFold 3. And then the third company is still trying to find its way. But, I would say 2 out of 3, that was a good return, for the
It's pretty
first
good.
bunch.
Yeah.
And then
For
now
sure.
this year, our second iteration of this, we're doing this in a partnership with a venture capital group, a Q5. And we just selected our 4 winners, and we will be announcing them soon. And I'm so excited about the new crop coming up.
Yeah, brilliant. Very much looking forward to that. You also collaborate with Novo Nordisk in Denmark, who in their own way are pioneering, of course, in quantum, really pushing an ecosystem out of the ground there. What is the nature of that collaboration?
Yes, we are very happy about our relationship with the Novo Nordisk group. They're really very forward thinking, and their investments in quantum go all the way from they want to define what is the hardware that's going to work best. So they have that whole initiative. And of course, they had their big investment in NVIDIA on the AI side. Our relationship with them is purely on the quantum and AI applications end. So Cleveland Clinic as an organization has a long history with Novo Nordisk Foundation. You mentioned you mentioned our history in heart disease, metabolic disease. So we have a lot of work already with the Novo Nordisk, company and foundation over time. So when we got interested in quantum, it was a natural fit with their interest in that field. what we do with them is this fellowship program, which they fund, a postdoctoral fellowship exchange, where we send our trainees to Denmark to work there with labs around AI and quantum projects. The fellowship funds each postdoc for up to 4 years. So you have time to do meaningful work, and it's not just like a quick rotation here and there, and vice versa. So they could send also their postdocs here for collaborative work. So they've been a great group to work with. So we're looking forward to see how that pans out.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to bring John in here a bit more as well. So, John, you founded 2 quantum companies. You're on your way to be the Elon Musk of quantum, people told me. I mean, perhaps not temperamentally, but in terms of number, you're getting there. And you're also the director of the Quantum Biomed Hub. Could you maybe tell us a bit about the 2 companies you co-founded, and then also, of course, what you're doing at the Quantum Biomed Hub?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I would say in quantum computing, the big challenge is how do we bridge this gap between the early quantum computing prototypes that we have today and these really exciting transformative applications such as the one that Lara's been talking about. And we can address this from 2 different sides. On the one hand, we need scalable quantum computing technology. We need ways to build quantum computers that can reach the level of hundreds of thousands, even millions of qubits. And that's what we're trying to do in Quantum Motion, using the same silicon transistor technology that powers smartphones and laptops today, and use those elements as the building blocks of the quantum computer. But there's also big gains to be made by making the algorithms more efficient. And within Phasecraft, that's the challenge, looking at ways in which quantum algorithms can be made more efficient so that you can get more out of quantum hardware today and bridge that gap between the 2.
Okay. And then at the Sensing Hub, can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, so quantum sensing is this, it's really exciting opportunity that comes out of this big drive that we've had in developing quantum technologies like quantum computing. And we've figured out new ways to harness nature at the quantum level, at single photons or single atoms, single particles. And we've found ways in which that can be used to develop new types of sensors that can be applied in biomedical and health applications. And in some cases, that can just radically advance the limits of sensitivity. And in other cases, it means that we can get the same level of sensitivity for which you need a specialized laboratory test, but you can now do that in a low resource setting. What does that mean? It could be in a GP surgery, in a shopping mall, or in a rural area. So quantum sensors really have the capacity to impact a wide range of different healthcare challenges.
Okay. And where does this fit within the wider UK quantum strategy? Why was it chosen to solely focus on sensing?
Yeah. Well, the UK's had this quantum technologies program going back almost 10 years now, and funding these research hubs in different areas: computing, communication, sensing, and timing. And we felt the time was right when the hub was proposed, when we proposed the hub last year, to do something that was really focused around the healthcare and biomedical space. Because I think to get the most out of these technologies and make sure that you're addressing the most pressing questions, you need to be sector focused so that you're working with clinicians and finding out where can quantum sensors really help. So we took what at the time was a radical approach. We weren't just going to cover all of quantum sensing. We were specifically focused in the healthcare space, and we brought a large number of clinicians working alongside the quantum physicists to find that common language and fine-tune the quantum sensors to these different applications, whether that's medical imaging, in vitro diagnostics, new kinds of surgical tools enhanced by quantum sensors, or the kind of quantum sensing technologies that can be used in fundamental life sciences to understand disease mechanisms.
And it's research focused, or it's also meant to seed startups, or how do we think about that?
The hub ultimately is focused on research, but a key part of that, if it's success, is making sure that research gets successfully translated. So it begins with a dialogue with clinicians to make sure that we're addressing the right challenges and we have the right target specifications. The typical physicist just carries on making the sensor more and more sensitive and doesn't necessarily know when to stop. At what point is it good enough to actually start being applied? So our first mission is that clinical engagement that allows us to define the needs, right? And then there's the research element, which is of course the sort of major part of where we're putting our efforts. But then there's the translation side and the regulation side. And so we have a significant portion of our funding focused on those turning that research into proof of concepts that can go into preclinical trials, and then also to seed startups through some of the seed funding that we have in the hub before it can be taken over by the traditional investment.
And the hub or the funding for the hub, is there open-endedly, or is it a 10-year project?
It's a 5-year funding in this initial phase. It's a £24 million project. It's something that could potentially be renewed, and it's also part of a much larger mission that the UK has set in quantum technologies. Yeah. And one of these 3 missions is focused around quantum sensors for health. Okay. So we see ourselves as a key part of delivering that mission. Okay. And that sets this really challenging objective of, by 2030, getting these quantum sensors into NHS trusts around the UK.
Oh, that would be amazing if that could be delivered indeed. What does it compare to? Is it similar to QB in Chicago, for example?
Yeah, it's actually there's a number of different centers around the world that have recognized this potential for quantum sensors. Definitely Chicago's a big area. Also Ulm in Germany and in Australia. Okay. I think each of these brings a different angle. Probably where we see as one of our strengths is that level of clinical engagement that we have, that is well balanced between the quantum physicists and engineers and clinicians, and our focus around the breadth of different medical applications where we see these quantum sensors being deployed.
The hub also collaborates internationally. You have partnerships with some of these other places?
Yes, I mean, of course, we've had very nice discussions with Cleveland Clinic, and we hosted a Cleveland Clinic at UCL to explore potential applications and collaborations. But we're certainly looking internationally about where we can see complementary strengths and start developing these technologies together.
If you look indeed a bit, to bring it briefly back to startups, I mean, according to the Tony Blair Institute, they published a report fairly recently. There's about 500 quantum startups in the world, and about 150 sit in the US, unsurprisingly. But second in the world comes the UK with about 65. What proportion of these numbers are sensing startups really, or are they mostly on the computing side or the cryptography side?
Yeah, I mean, I say from my personal experience, the UK has been a fantastic place to develop the quantum computing startups. The national program and the investment landscape has been brilliant, and also plugging into the wider European landscape has been critical. But it's certainly true that perhaps counterintuitively, I would say the majority of my feeling is that there's a majority of quantum startups within the computing space, and yet sensors are now finding this. These early applications for quantum technologies. And so I think we're going to see many more quantum startups coming out in the quantum space. Okay. The thing to sort of balance that against is of course, from a commercialization or investment perspective, the diagnostics are not always the most attractive quantum startup proposition. You know, it's all very well to tell someone that you've got something, but really, you know, potentially the biggest returns are in providing then the remedy.
Yeah, true, very true. Could you tell our audience also a little bit more about the actual technology that is quantum sensing in general, and perhaps with also some details on diamond sensors in particular?
Yeah. I think this is one of the challenges that we have with quantum sensors, because it's so broad, right? With quantum computing, we have a fairly well-defined definition of the machine. Quantum sensors describe a really wide range of different ways in which we're using quantum systems to sense properties more accurately. But two of the big front runners are nitrogen vacancy sensors in diamond and optically pumped magnetometers. I'll focus mostly in the diamond to start with. And here, if you take diamond, naturally occurring diamond, and it has a bit of color, that's because it's not pure diamond, it's not pure carbon. There's a few atomic defects. Okay. And through the development of quantum technology research, we found a way to isolate the signal from individual atomic defects within the diamond. Now, why is that powerful? Because diamond can also be produced in this nanoparticle form, in these nanodiamonds, at relatively low cost. And this means that they can be functionalized to bind to particular biomarkers, and they can therefore be used in diagnostics. We're all unfortunately very familiar with lateral flow tests and the red line from COVID. Course, yeah. That red line, maybe is made out of gold nanoparticles, and that comes up as red. But you can also use nanodiamond, and that can be more sensitive. And by manipulating these atomic defects within the nanodiamond, we can go one level further in sensitivity.
Okay.
And actually, we showed a few years ago that you can improve sensitivity by over 100,000-fold, and therefore detect a single copy of an HIV virus.
Okay.
And this is a platform technology. You can then apply it to many different types of biomarkers. We've shown it since the hub started for COVID, using clinical samples from the UCLH. And we're just beginning to explore the different types of biomarkers and diseases that we can use for this kind of sensing technology. And it's a great example of something that then could be deployed in a GP surgery, as I said, in a shopping mall or in other kinds of settings that allow for faster point of care testing.
Yeah, as a former clinician, this strongly speaks to me, and I'm sure the same is true for you, Lara, when you see these things that we could replace ECGs and all the mess that comes with it with a simple sensor. Of course, it's amazing. I mean, I also saw, and that speaks more to your field, I think, some detection or early detection of Parkinson's. There's been some TBC or tuberculosis testing. What are some of those that you are excited about with your particular clinical hat on?
As a neurologist, I have to be excited about the applications that allow us to diagnose different types of brain conditions early. There is a transformative step in epilepsy, for example, was the development of MEG, magnetoencephalography, as a tool that allows us to merge both electrophysiology and structure, right? We have an MRI, a detailed picture of the brain, and then we overlay on top of it where the abnormal electrical activity is happening. This is a unique capability, but now only few hospitals have it. And it's a very complex thing to set up with magnetic shielding, special rooms. It's costly. It's difficult. So the potential that we have with quantum sensing to make all of this portable and available in the community, say for sports teams after head trauma while playing football, or in the defense setting, for head trauma on the battlefield, or those are things that have always been very difficult to ascertain on the spot, and situations where time is of the essence, right? You have a window to intervene before the damage is irreversible. So these types of applications where treatment is time sensitive, diagnosis is difficult because of the location where the injury happens, the potential of portability that we have with the quantum sensing approaches is tremendous.
Yes, it's very easy to get excited about it. Also, it's such a demonstration of quantum for good, and it's not even extremely long term, and it's right in front of us. Now, yesterday I did a recording of an episode here on quantum and defense, which indeed is the other use for sensing. I don't know how you feel about that as a doctor, as a clinician, about defense applications. Do you think about that in this line of work? Do you, John? I mean, I might ask you first, Lara, seeing that I opened it to you.
We have, not just in medicine, I think we're living now in an era where a technology advance in one field ends up, whether it wants it or not, it's never intentional, I believe, but at the end of the day, it ends up benefiting other fields in ways that nobody imagined, right? I don't think whenever the laser was first invented that people thought its biggest application would be scanning groceries in the grocery store,
Sure.
but yet, that's how it happened. And a lot of the wearable technology that we have now in medicine what initially started on with defense type applications because vital signs and function had to be monitored when soldiers are deployed, for example. And it is that same technology that now we have in our Apple Watches and people tracking their heart rate to see if they're exercising enough, So that is just the way I look at it is there's no limit, either good or bad, right? To any technology as it develops, and we cannot fight it to stop it. What we should do is look at what good can come out of it and then see how we can apply it in our own discipline. So I have no doubt in my mind that whatever is being worked on in defense could have some aspects that would benefit medicine and humanity.
Okay, great. What do you think about that, John?
Yeah, I agree. I think that many of these are platform technologies, and a sensor that is developed for some kind of health application. Of course, there are potentially ways in which that technology can be applied in other ways. And the quantum computer is another great example of something which is a general purpose technology. Yes. So, but I think for me, the tricky aspect comes when that potential security or defense application then begins to limit international cooperation, which I think is really critical for the development of these technologies. And so where we need to be careful is maybe not overemphasizing these kinds of security applications. And we remember that there are still big challenges in developing these technologies. And to do that, we need to be working with the best people around the world and collaborating to make these a reality.
Yes, I agree with that. A lot of the coverage in the media is also alarmist and talks about decryption and military, and often the side for good is not highlighted enough.
But it was one of the first motivations for quantum computing. It was when the field really shot up when Shor's algorithm came along and realized that this RSA 2048 encryption could be broken, and so it's a good example of where a kind of security or defense application then seeded this, hugely powerful platform technology that we're expecting to have a big impact across many sectors.
Very true. Changing topic a bit before we go to drug discovery. One of the things that I'm also very interested in as a doctor and former clinician, and I'm sure the same is true for you, Lara, our education as doctors is not software orientated at all, let alone quantum. How are you finding that when you're bringing quantum in the workforce there in the Cleveland Clinic? Or I'm sure people are receptive, but where's the skills and how do you go about that?
Yeah, critical question, I have to say, and it was one that we, you can't really address it in just one approach. So we had many initially workshops, seminars, open houses, just. That's why I say having the machine was good, because we would organize. Some of our postdocs even organized a weekly lunch. It was on Thursdays around the machine, and they called it Q Bites, as a play on the on the word with qubits. So we had to be, bend over backwards with coming up with different approaches to educate and communicate. We worked with our medical school here in Cleveland Clinic. We have our College of Medicine, and it's one of the few medical schools in the US where research has its own year. So there is the 4-year medical school curriculum. There is an additional year in CCRCM, which is purely research.
Okay.
So we worked with the curriculum development team to add a data science education course right before that research year. And we embedded some self-paced quantum education in it to start there. We worked with our local school systems in Cleveland so that we start in middle school and high school with presenting what quantum is and what it can do. Our latest education exercise is partnering with one of our public school, state-funded schools in Ohio called Miami University. They developing a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD purely in quantum science.
Okay.
There's, of course, many PhD and master's programs, but this will be the first bachelor that I'm aware of where you just get trained in quantum technologies. And all of their students, part of their curriculum will spend a summer plus the semester that follows. So a total of about 9 months in our labs applying this quantum education in biomedical research. So it's in all of this is laying, the ground work for instilling this education throughout our system, from kids all the way to PhDs, and then offering them all opportunities to practice what they're learning, working at the Cleveland Clinic in our research labs and with our clinicians. It's a lot of work, but it's essential because if there's this technology and nobody knows how to use it, I don't know how useful is that.
Yeah, exactly. How are you experiencing us as clinicians to talk with John? You hinted at you guys not always knowing where sensitive, but tell us more.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, the first step is really finding the right language, because I was actually, I remember being around a coffee table when we were first cooking up the Q Biomed project, and we were all talking about sensitivity, and we were all using 3 completely different definitions. So a physicist was using, we were talking about these nanodiamond sensors, and as a physicist, I was talking about a sensitivity in femtotesla per root hertz, some physical quantity. And the biochemists that we were with were talking about how many nanomolar or picomolar, so some concentration of a particle. And the clinician from Great Ormond Street was basically saying, how much blood do I need to extract from this child to get a measurable signal? And, so the first level is just, as you say, understanding what is the sensitivity that matters? What's the current bottleneck, and where can quantum sensors help? But I think that, since launching the hub, we're now well over a year into the hub. We're getting much more sort of inbound interest. The profile of the hub and quantum sensors has just been shooting up in the UK. More and more funding schemes to bring on new projects. And so now I think our big challenge is prioritization. We develop these platform technologies. We end up growing long lists of different ways in which they can be applied. Some cases it could be transformative, but for sort of very specialized disease that just affects a handful of people. In some cases, it maybe offers a small improvement, but over something very broad like dementia. And so how are we going to prioritize all of these things? Where are going to be the earliest wins? That's, I would say, the kind of challenge that we're grappling with at the moment.
Yeah, a very interesting one, though. Is there any learnings? Are there any disciplines that are more receptive to this whole development?
One of the benefits that we've had is we've had clinicians within the hub from the beginning, so they understand the right way to engage. They understand the huge time pressures that clinicians are under.
Yes.
And so knowing what those entry points are, right? Trying to create new workshops and getting people to come is extremely challenging. Finding out where they're already meeting and going into those opportunities and using that to showcase, I think that's been a key learning that has helped us make with early engagement. But I think once we've been able to start those conversations, we found clinicians extremely receptive and excited about this kind of new technology.
Yeah.
I guess for me, I'm learning a huge amount every day in these discussions, which makes it a lot of fun.
And we learn from you guys too, obviously. I mean, for you say Shor's algorithm. We don't know what you're talking about at first. We say cytochrome P450. You don't know what we are talking about. So there's every day that sort of dialogue. And I'm sure, Lara, you have it as well plenty of times.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I really relate to the John's point about learning the language. An example I always use is I'm sure people who've heard me speak before heard it already. When we started with putting those research teams together, the biomedical researcher or the clinician together with the physicist or computational scientist, whomever is on the other side, it was like I had it all where the one half, say, speaks only German, the other half speaks only Chinese, and I'm asking for a document in English. So it was people really they know their field really well, but then it's really hard for them to open up and, get
Of
that
course, of
other
course, of course.
expertise. Yes, it's always, for me, it's the most interesting and challenging part of the whole thing, actually. It's building the right team.
Yes, no, and I personally love these intersections very much. I mean, and they are everywhere with quantum. It intersects with AI, with finance, with the healthcare world. It's super interesting to develop these languages that then both halves indeed end up speaking. Now, one thing that everybody always gets excited about, lay people, doctors, physicists, is drug discovery. As you say, it's a bit more popular perhaps than diagnosis purely. When we look at that world, though, Lara, again, talking to you as a fellow medic, I mean, in pharma, there is Boehringer Ingelheim in Germany that is very active in quantum, probably pioneering, if you like. There's Novo Nordisk, there's Eli Lilly. But then to our point that we just made, drug discovery is also very much now a software and technology undertaking. Some people would say that NVIDIA is the biggest health company in the world. How do you look at that? Where do you see that go, pharma, tech, and who extracts the value of these companies that are being built?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question, isn't it? But the whole field is so pharma companies are also moving in the same direction, where the exercise of drug discovery is a lot more computational now than it ever was. The days when, say, I went to medical school or was doing residency 20 years ago, where most discovery in general was happening with bench research at the lab.
Yes.
And, trying different compounds to see what each one of them will do. Nobody does work this way now. The computation, this is not now a hypothetical. This is the way drug discovery happens. It is heavily computational at the beginning in its initial phases, whether it is, identifying the leads, optimizing the leads, finding the targets. All of it is really simulation at this point. And that is great for our patients, actually, because instead of wasting years building compounds and then trying them out only to see that they don't work, at least what we can do now with computer simulation, molecular dynamics, molecular modeling, however, all these different aspects, whether it's happening in a biomedical research facility like the clinic, or in a pharma company, all what it's doing, it's skipping steps. It's simplifying the process where we are prioritizing what the compounds that need to be prioritized so that we can take them further down. So I think the biggest value from a societal benefit, hopefully, is going to be accelerated drug discovery and safer drugs. You mentioned the cytochrome P450, right? If we can simulate the metabolism of our drugs more accurately, then better preempt toxicity, efficacy, safety, then that will be tremendous. Now, from a financial revenue perspective, who is going to recover most of that? That is very variable, I would say, across economies, across healthcare system structures, and financial constructs. It will be, it's the same as what's happening now in gene therapy, for example, right? Where we have these, the CRISPR technology and other technologies that can potentially cure a disease with just one, application. So that is wonderful in theory, but they're so expensive that patients cannot afford them. Right? So what did you end up doing at the end? Are we helping society or not? Over time, all of these technologies become cheaper. So I have no doubt in my mind that over time, it will all become affordable. But the challenge is this interval period where it's difficult, where how do you deploy these innovations and maintain some equity where the people who need it will get it, not just the people who can afford it will get it.
Exactly. John?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a wonderful application of quantum computing, perhaps even the first one that Richard Feynman spotted. You know, he said nature isn't classical, damn it. And if you want to build a simulation of nature, such as what you want, if you want to design drugs in a computer, then you've got to make the computer quantum mechanical. I think that one of the challenges is, in order to do this properly, we're going to need very large quantum computers. There's some really interesting near-term ways to solve the problem. Phasecraft has developed a technique called quantum enhanced density functional theory, which is a way to split the problem of modeling molecules by giving some of the hard problems to the quantum computer, but otherwise using, let's say, existing classical techniques. But still, I think to really realize this kind of potential, these are the kinds of problems that will need quantum computers at the sort of million qubit plus level. So I think there we have exactly the challenge that Lara mentioned, is if this is a £1 billion machine and these problems take a long time to run, how are the economics going to work? And it's a fascinating question then, how is the value of that going to be shared with drug companies? And I think if who knows exactly how that's going to turn out, but clearly if it's an accelerating and transformative technology, quantum computing companies will find a way to extract that value. But hopefully we're going to find ways, and indeed it will be essential that we find ways to build quantum computers in a cost-effective way, even at that scale, so that you can really use them for these kinds of applications. And that may require different kinds of quantum computing hardware than we have at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You know, the way we're doing our part here is we have mobilized we have a drug discovery group here in Cleveland Clinic, our Center for it's morphine, it's experimental therapeutics, and we do everything from, it's mostly small molecules for the most part, and some biologics too, and some targeted immunotherapy, CAR T-cell therapy for lung cancer and other types of cancer. So all of this is happening now in Cleveland Clinic, and we have a group that does develop vaccines. We just developed a vaccine for breast cancer. So all of those groups that are already doing drug discovery type work are the ones that have partnered with our computational, the quantum chemistry team that we have. And what we're doing is we're basically dissecting all of these different steps on the computational side that have to go to enable these simulations. And we're building platforms around each one of them, right? So like in a way, you take the work that we're doing and you see the papers coming out, each one of them is addressing a very specific computational challenge around that whole problem set, that needs to be developed. And we're chipping at it step by step so that whenever the hardware is ready, like John is saying, we will be fully ready for it. And what we're realizing along the way is that there are all these opportunities to optimize where, say, even if we have hardware that can take in, that has 1 million qubits in it, or, that can take in so many, such heavy computation, do we really need it to do that? The fact that it can do it doesn't necessarily mean this is the way we should go. So we're doing a lot to figure out what of those steps really need quantum versus how far can we go with advanced AI approaches, right? So that we take the most advantage out of whatever hardware exists at any point in time.
Why has AI not quite delivered, though? I mean, if you look at, say, DeepMind, I mean, how could you not be excited when AlphaFold came out? It was such a game-changing thing. I still remember it. It's almost like, as a medic, it's like goosebump material almost. Then the billions have gone in, isomorphic labs, for example, but we're still not there. The clinical trial that was held out to be there by the end of 2025, and we all know you can have holdups, but it doesn't seem to be necessarily within reach, that first AI synthesized drug. Why is that in your opinion? I mean, John, maybe you can.
Probably Lara can say more in terms of how, in terms of the existing efforts for computation-driven drug discovery. But maybe Feynman was right. All right, there are elements which are extremely difficult, and if there are, if we're limited to interpolating between what limited classical simulations are giving us, then maybe we miss something, and maybe that's the key ingredient that we need a quantum computer to provide in order to support more successful AI-driven drug discovery.
Yeah, could easily be. Yeah. What do you think, Lara?
So there are just inherent challenges with the way you can simulate drug with AI technologies. So, for example, you are just the technology. You cannot simulate transitions in state really well. Whenever we simulate drugs with AI, we assume a fixed structure. This is the chemical compound, and this is how it looks like in 3D. But that's not really how the body works. Proteins change and receptors change, and all of these bindings are happening in fluid. They're not happening in vacuum, right? So that is only one of the issues. There's many issues like that. Rare diseases, that's a huge gap that, again, AI by definition, machine learning, it's the output depends on how good the input was, whether it's diversity or depth of the data, right? So you train a model, AlphaFold or others, on what is known. Well, so what is known is not really the enough about the receptors and targets in rare diseases. So you will come up with predictions that don't really fit that well what you're wanting to address. I mean, those are exactly the challenges with AI-based drug discovery that are fueling the interest in looking at what quantum can do.
That's John? An excellent example, and it sort of highlights the importance of time dynamics in materials discovery, which is perhaps one of the earlier applications in quantum computing. There's some recent papers that have been coming out claiming quantum computational advantage. We're looking exactly at this problem of time dynamics, of modeling the time evolution of a material, and it's exactly that kind of element that Lara's referring to in terms of the dynamics in molecular dynamics that may be challenging for existing AI models, but where quantum computers are already showing advances in materials.
Okay. Could you clear something up, John, for our audience? Because I feel that in the media, this gets constantly confused. So on the one hand, the media talks about the million qubit computer, and it's never said whether it's logical or physical qubits and what these ratios even are. So that's one question. Second point is, in many ways, drug discovery material sciences might very well be the low-hanging fruit, and we don't need a million logical qubits to do some decent work there. Could you demystify the qubit counting a bit in this particular context of drug discovery?
Yeah, no, and
it's not only that, I know, but
I mean, it's a really interesting. The challenge is how do you take all of these different quantum computers around the world, and what people try to do is say, how can I describe their performance with a single number? Right. And of course, we don't do that with normal computing. We have clock speed, and we have RAM, and we have all of these other factors. So the fact is, you need to look at a number of different aspects. It's tempting to look at physical qubit count. In fact, that's one of the most the simple and general methods. But as you say, in order to solve these deep quantum circuits and lengthy quantum algorithms, you need to wrap up these physical qubits into logical qubits, which are more robust. Of course, one of the challenges there is no single thing as a logical qubit, right? Logical qubits don't suddenly become immune for the rest of eternity. You have fairly rubbish logical qubits that may be a little bit more robust than their sort of physical qubits, or you may have you may group together large numbers of physical qubits to make much more robust logical qubits. So I'm not in general a big fan of the logical qubit definition, because it's too open-ended. It's like saying, how many applications can your computer run? Well, it depends. Are we talking about one really difficult one or lots of little tiny ones? So I think that generally speaking, when I talk about 1 million qubits, I'm talking about physical qubits.
Okay.
And the reason it's a large number is then we need to take these into, group them up to make the kind of really strong logical qubits that can run a long algorithm like a problem in drug discovery. It's certainly possible that we can start to get some gains earlier using these kinds of quantum enhanced methods. But I would say that all these kinds of applications that have people really excited, we need to show a route towards building quantum computers at the level of 1 million physical qubits, and to do so so that they don't take up the GDP of a small country to build. The kind of that they are in a form factor and a cost that we can make many of them and put many of them into places like the Cleveland Clinic.
Okay. No, wonderful. I'm going to have a few more quick questions because I'm aware of the time. One country that's also emerging or has emerged very strongly in biotech is obviously China. And it also is investing heavily in quantum and AI for drug discovery, wanting to bring the process down from years to hours, is what I last read. How do we follow that, and how do we know what is going on there, and is it safe what is going on there? How should we try to follow it, Lara?
Yes. Well, I mean, of course, we're all supportive of international collaboration, and science is always a race, but we have to live within certain geopolitical, limits that govern what we do. And there is a limit to how much, the quality of what you can provide if you're cutting corners, right? So we can only follow what we're allowed to follow and what gets published and what is made available to us. See what we can about what types of guidelines and principles, are being there.
You follow the science as well? You try to read papers that they publish at least in international journals?
Yeah, try to, but I think, it's always difficult. You get asked, well, what about the stuff that you don't know about? Well, I don't know about them. It's hard.
Sure.
I think it is certainly impressive what's being done in quantum computing. But if I look at the quantum computers that are out there that we can access and run on, they're still mostly in the US, I would say, in terms of the most advanced systems.
Okay. Prediction markets, we talked about it before a little bit. There's a couple out there. There's Polymarket, there's Kalshi. Polymarket, the quantum stuff that you find there is on, you can make bets on in what quantum companies the US will take stakes. That's what they focus on. On Kalshi, it was indeed the cracking of the Shor's algorithm, or indeed the ability for a quantum computer to simulate cytochrome P450, or indeed iron molybdenum cofactor. What do you think of that? I mean, have you put some money in, or?
Does this count as insider trading?
It does not.
It does not.
Nor does it count as investment
nor
advice.
Does it exactly. I think it's interesting that the kind of dates that they were looking at, this sort of threshold of where where you get this inflection in really significant commercial returns and advantage. There seem to be values between, the market consensus was somewhere between 2030 and 2035. And then you have efforts like this DARPA Quantum Benchmark Initiative, a really fascinating, international competition where DARPA is asking the question, not just can you build a quantum computer, but can you build one which is worth building, right? Yeah. Where the cost addresses the value. And DARPA's timeline for that, their deadline is 2033. So it sits right in between those two extremes. Yes. So I don't know, somehow it all seems to be consistent.
Sure. Lara?
I would say there is safer and faster ways to make money than to bet on cash. I'll have to wait till 2035 and then, maybe some return comes. But No, but see
But it's interesting that it sits there. It's interesting.
That's what I was going to like. In on the serious side, I was very encouraged to see that, in that at least this is now so mainstream, and so in the like realm of reality, that there is like this catchy where people are betting on it, versus years ago where this was science fiction as a conversation. So just its presence, I think, is proof of how far the field has gone.
Yeah, I agree. And I find talking with the two of you also, and just immersing myself more in the subject matter, it is heartwarming what quantum could do and how it could help the field forward and us as humans. Contrasting that indeed with some of the stuff that today comes out of the US with the MAHA movement and drinking raw milk and moon juices, sex dust, it at least this gives a bit of hope. And I do really hope that the Cleveland Clinic continues to contribute. And I'm sure we on our side of the Atlantic will do our bit. And I look forward to the future we're all building. Thank you so much, Lara, for your time. And thank you so much, John, as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.